welcome very much. Good to see you. You turning your machine off? Good idea, and so good to see you always.
Always.
Welcome to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to Prior Conversations. One of New York's best, as it were, autodidactic scholar and intellectual, and that's being Lenni Brenner. We're going to be here talking about his own life's experience with emphasis upon the situation here on, the 24th of November, where everything's fine all over the world. There are no problems left. Everything's been solved because we have such sterling leadership in our business community. And he's going to lay that out for us all. And I'm glad to have a thing of good Thanksgiving that you have, that we finally got the kind of leadership we deserve.
Oh, well, I've been telling people, hey, you get what you deserve,
That's a joke, son.
Yeah.
So share your background. I know we're going to want to talk a lot about the thing as far as the drug issue is, which is huge in terms of the reality of the world economy and so forth. But share your background, maybe particularly as it might be illustrative of your experiences that could help you understand that situation in a way that would be worthy for us all to understand. But share your own background, please.
Okay, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
I see drugs as part of a larger question of intoxicants in general. In
Okay.
other words, I count liquor along with drugs on the same bag. Now, I, of course, don't remember this, but when I was 6 weeks old, my father was killed in a head-on collision with a drunk driver.
Wow.
All right?
Okay. Yeah.
However, he was on the highway because he had just sold furniture to a guy who was setting up a new bar. My father worked for my grandfather, who made kitchen and bar equipment.
I see.
So in other words, he was killed coming back from selling a bar by a drunk driver.
Boy, it could be amazing.
Okay,
Short story.
and the drunk driver, his wife was also killed.
Wow.
The drunk driver walked away scot-free, not even a scratch.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Uh-huh.
And I grew up going to my grandfather's factory on the Bowery, because that's where they used to make all the bars in the eastern part of the United States.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
And at the same time, the Bowery in those days, this was in the early 40s, was the world's biggest skid row.
Really? That's where Skid Row was,
Yeah. I mean, let me put it this way. I must have seen 20,000 drunkards by the time I was 5 years old, walking by the factory, and I would look out the window at them, etc. Okay. And then, of course, when I was 15 is when I started drinking on my own.
Okay.
And when I say drinking on my own, I mean that in those days, most of the bars, the legal age in New York was 18.
Yeah.
But if you could walk in on your own without a stroller, they served you.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
Okay.
I can remember traveling from Detroit to
All right.
Idaho when we were
Now,
19, so we could get a beer.
My alcohol experience, my wildest alcohol experience is one day I was told, hey, there's going to be a hootenanny, and a guy named Woody Guthrie is going to be there. So you better get there early.
Yes, indeed.
So me and a buddy showed up. Each of us had a pint of Jack Daniels.
Right.
Okay. And we
Black or red?
it was 50 years
Makes
ago.
a difference.
All right. Okay. But anyway, we show up, and it turns out we're the first ones there.
Yeah, right.
Now, instead, I didn't even know who Woody Guthrie was.
Okay.
All right.
How old are you now?
At this time, I must have been 16, 17 years
good.
old.
Gotcha.
All right. And I'm taking a shot out of the Jack Daniels, and he sees me. He's setting up, okay, and he sees me. Woody.
Yeah, right.
All right, and Sonny Terry was there, but Sonny's blind, all right? Okay. No, literally, I mean, he's blind Sonny Terry, all right?
Yeah.
So Woody sees me, and I wave
The
pipe,
Yeah.
And he nods, so I come over, and he takes a shot out of Woody Guthrie.
Right out of the bottle.
Out of my bottle, you
Out of your
understand,
bottle.
all right?
What
All right,
is that?
okay?
Yeah.
Now, I don't remember a song he sang that night
But you'll
because
never
I woke
forget
up on the floor drunk.
Oh,
you know?
right.
All right.
Right,
Okay.
right,
Yeah.
right.
But hey, man, I remember it as a joyous occasion. I mean,
yeah.
And
right.
I mean, permanently. in my
Right.
mind. Okay.
Right.
And now I didn't even know about illegal drugs in my old neighborhood in the Bronx. I was first introduced to them about 1958 by a buddy who turned me on to pot, which I liked right away.
Okay, let me get it straight. You were born when? How old were you?
So I was 21.
21.
Yeah,
before
yeah.
you
This
knew
is
from pot.
From pot,
Okay,
right? All right, and I liked it, etc. A few months later, he introduced me to heroin. Okay, which I had took 4 times and decided I didn't like it.
Did you throw up?
No, but it was kind of like the nearest equivalent would be similar to being drunk. In other words, you're not really in control of your physical presence. That kind of thing. Okay, then I met a guy, Carmine Pampaloni, who came out of the most incredibly intense mafia background, okay? And his father once chased Lucky Luciano down the block when they were kids with a butcher knife, that kind of thing,
I know
okay?
what you mean.
All right, but Carmine went over once to Union Square to beat up commies.
Okay. Were you a commie?
No. He went over to beat up commies, only they grabbed him and sat him down, and the next thing you know, he became Carmine the commie. Okay? So I met him. He had just left the Communist Party and had moved back into his neighborhood on Avenue A and 11th Street and so on. Okay? All right? And through here, you see, as far as the young kids in the neighborhood were concerned, he was still Carmine from the mafia.
Right.
I mean, it was interesting that he had these left-wing opinions, but they knew he was one of them. All right. So through them, I met a lot of these guys. In the mafia, young mafiosis, because it's not the mafia. It's a milieu,
Yeah.
And eventually what happened was I was working for Carmine, and Carmine was getting his stuff, the best that the mafia had to offer, cocaine and stuff like that,
Okay.
So like somebody would come over, we worked.
Now you're 21 or so?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, it's about 21, 22.
Right.
These things happen one after the other, quickly.
Yeah.
See, once I started with illegal drugs, they moved very fast.
Yeah,
I went to look for them, so to speak. Okay. So I must have had powdered cocaine, about 15 times, because whenever somebody would come over to Carmine's to hire him, and I worked for Carmine, he would just open up, a little cocaine.
Box,
It was like, some
like
business having a drink or something like that.
Right,
it was nothing sinister about it, et cetera, et cetera. But I must have had cocaine about 15 times.
Yeah.
And then, at that time, peyote was legal in New York State.
Well, help me out again. What year you're talking?
Again, this is 57, 58.
57, 58. On the Road has been published?
Yeah. But peyote was legal, and there was a guy named Baron Buchholz at a place called the Dollar Sign on 6th Street, and he used to sell peyote.
Sell it right over the counter?
Right over the counter. It was
it
perfectly
legal
legal.
then?
Yeah, it was perfectly legal. Yeah.
LSD was around by then.
But
it
LSD was illegal in the United States. I got to. Well, let me finish with the peyote.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to get on.
I've already written up how I had peyote with Bob Dylan.
Wow, that's biggie, yeah.
Because we crashed together at the same place, et cetera. And I had some peyote, and one day he walked in, so I said, "Hey, Bob, here's some peyote," and he took it, I took it.
Okay.
We lived happily ever after. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. And now I've written this up. I mean, it's on the internet and all that kind of stuff. All right. With regards to LSD, I encountered LSD in San Francisco. There was a guy, an anarchist, an old anarchist named Phil Melman, and he used to get it. It was illegal in the United States, but it was legal in Britain. So they would send him this stuff here.
I didn't realize.
Well, it was legal at that time. All these things got tightened up, you know what I mean, by the government later, et cetera, all right? So I would say from the 50s to the 80s, I must have had LSD about 80 times.
Okay.
All right? Which is a good amount. I mean, it was my weekend relaxation,
Right.
Okay? So I'm trying to think. And I had mushrooms, et cetera. Now, with the marijuana thing, the funny thing that happened was funny, I went out to Berkeley, California, and one day the Attorney General arrived there, California, and I denounced their narcotics laws, particularly the marijuana law, and set up a marijuana reform.
67, 65,
say this again?
67, 66?
This was actually 63.
Oh, early. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So what happened was that I challenged him, and I organized an outdoor rally, and I organized a committee for narcotic reform, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got caught for possession of a butt end of a marijuana cigarette, a joint, a roach, about the width of my thumbnail. Okay, all right, but I was granted probation.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
First time.
Yeah. Okay, but then the Berkeley free speech movement broke out.
Mario Savio.
All right, and I, at the University of California, had the judge revoke my probation because of my activities during the free speech movement.
I'll be darned, really.
All right.
Did they make it up front that that was the case?
Oh, yeah. In other words, they sailed right in and, you know, sent a guy to speak on behalf of the university and stuff like that.
Who's in Sacramento then?
Brown.
It was Brown.
Old Brown.
Old Brown.
Old
Yeah,
Brown.
right.
A Democrat.
He was
I want to
pretty good
emphasize,
guy.
a Democrat.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
important for the analysis.
And he's thought of as a pretty good guy.
Well,
I mean, as well as you can think about those
look,
things.
what we're talking about is in the middle of the civil rights movement where
Right.
the Democrats were
Right.
wiretapping Martin Luther King.
Yeah, COINTELPRO.
I'm saying, in other words, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
America was formerly a democracy with elections. In reality, it was a police state of unbelievable magnitude.
Yeah, it was
I
really
have
heated
my
up there.
FBI file.
Yeah.
It's 280 pages.
Wow.
Okay.
Really? Yeah.
And one of the things that they didn't black out, because most of it is blacked out, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. But one of the things, they followed me from a civil rights, indoor peaceful civil rights rally all the way to my home, to Carmine's place. You know, I mean, we were rooming together.
They'd been on
Following me in the streets.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of thing. And this went on all the time.
FOIA or something? Freedom of Information Act?
Oh, in other words, now after Watergate, everything, you know, you can apply for your FBI file. But what they do is they black out 3/4 of it. Okay.
Any citizen can do that.
Yes.
Okay.
If you have an FBI file, you can file for it.
I suppose I do.
Well, you know,
I was thinking I should do that.
Well,
maybe, right?
by all means.
It'd be interesting to be part of
yes,
the file.
Yes, by all means, right.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, the best thing about it is they have all the dates of everything I ever did. I mean, I married such
Somebody's
and such and such
you.
day.
Yeah,
I got divorced. And so, you know, I mean, stuff that I'd long forgotten and stuff like that. You know, that kind of thing. Okay.
So anyway, you revoked your parole and put you in prison?
They sent me to the penitentiary, and this is the incredible thing. They were trying to get me off the political stage, all right? They put me in the court elevator that goes up to the court holding tank, goes up 10 flights. I no more than put 2 feet onto, you know, my 2 feet into the holding tank, and a guy walks up to me and taps me and says, "I know you. I heard you speak at Laney College during the Cuban Missile Crisis. My name is Huey Newton." Can you imagine that? They were trying to get me out of politics.
They sent you to graduate school.
To graduate school, right.
To get the real story.
I spent 4 days in intense discussion with Huey Newton.
That was a cram seminar.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, eventually what happened was that I took my case, by law, the state was required to permit me to appeal to the state Supreme Court.
Right.
Okay. And I had them appoint Charles Gary. Well, Gary later became the Panther lawyer and the lawyer for the crazy Reverend in Jonestown in
the guy who went to Guinea.
Guyana. In Guyana. Okay.
Yeah, right.
All right. But at any rate, I personally, while I was in prison, I studied law all the way back to colonial times.
Really?
Okay. And the result
you had time on your hands.
Oh, I had plenty of time. No, I really did. I
and
lucked out.
They gave you access to the
library?
library?
That's one thing.
There was a library there?
Oh, yeah, I worked in the library.
You worked in the library?
I worked in the library for an hour a day, and the rest of my time was my own. So.
And you could take books from the library?
Oh, and I mean,
back and forth. Like a seminar.
I'll tell you something. It was. I got to tell you. In other words, I completed. I sat down and read everything back to the Gilgamesh cycle.
I hear you. I was just at a thing where they had demonstration about the justice system and so forth with people, and they had a guy there named, he was a lawyer, and he said, in the prison system where they got so many people locked up in prison, so much, they should have it be where it is like a like an educational opportunity.
Let me tell you something.
To
Let me tell you
activate the
something.
mind and let them have
All right,
access.
I was
and they lock that stuff.
All right, now
they
in
don't
those
give them
days,
advantage to
in
that, or
those days,
access to it.
in those days,
Crazy.
like I was
they want
sentenced.
to suffer. They
In
want
those
to,
days, like I was sentenced to 1 to 10 years.
Boy, that's all.
No. I understand, but what I'm getting at
Yeah.
is that you had a lot of these sentences for all different kinds of crimes. You know,
Yeah.
1 to 10, 1 to 5, 1
Yeah.
to 25,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Now, they weren't allowed legally to emphasize education because, you know, a guy is dumb. He committed a crime. There shouldn't be any discrimination against him because he's dumb. But in the real world, they did. Their attitude was, look, guy, you're here. If you've got any brain in your head at all, you sit down and you study. So if you didn't get out of high school, you get your high school diploma.
They did that when you were in?
I mean, for everybody.
Why don't they do that now? They systematically
Because,
do
as I
not
say,
do
the
that
good
now.
guys, the ACLU and those kind of people would say, no, you can't discriminate against the guy in terms of his sentence on the grounds that he's dumb. If you and I committed the same crime, we should be doing the same time. Okay, you see?
It costs more money to send somebody to prison than it does to send them to Harvard. So why don't they combine
understand what I'm saying is that I agree with you that in the reality I favor what the parole board really did, okay? Because like I gave a talk once to a bunch of students on American politics, and another friend of mine gave, and they were so enthusiastic. They had never heard this stuff in their schools. You know, these were all dropouts, black and white from the South and all that, that kind of stuff. Okay, so let me put it this way. I would say, like I had powdered cocaine and so on and so forth. When I got out of prison and began to get into other things, etc., my attitude became, if you come to me with a drug, I'll take it, but I don't go looking for drugs. All right? So the result is, I've never tried ecstasy, which is the drug for the young kids now.
That's the newer thing.
That's the newer thing, and I never tried crack cocaine. All right? And but
freebase.
Yeah, but on the other hand, as I say, I had acid 80 times, et cetera, et cetera. So
it's a different kettle of fish.
Well, they're all different. See,
they're all different.
Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
Because I spent and I fought my way out of prison. Okay, I was able to prove that I was a political prisoner.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
So I sent in a habeas corpus to the local court.
And you learned how to do that.
I really sat down and did all that kind of stuff. And what happened was when I simply told them, look, it's really very simple. You're going to read this my petition for habeas corpus, and so is the judge. Your lawyers will be able to tell you whether the judge is going to grant me my habeas corpus. So the next thing I know, I got a discharge, not a parole,
out the door.
Out the door, so that I wouldn't be I wouldn't be in a legal position to challenge them as a prisoner being held. See what I'm saying? All right.
You were too big to fail.
Yeah. All right. So, but when I came out, I got into many other different things, et cetera, et cetera.
And you've been in ever since.
Yeah. All right. Now, but on the other hand, I'm known to a lot of people because of my pot bust, et cetera. Like, I'm friendly with Ethan Nadelman, who's Soros's drug man from the Drug Policy Alliance, et cetera.
Right.
And Dana Beal from
Dana Beal. What's he got? Overthrow magazine.
Yeah, whatever, you know.
And Pie Man.
All right. I know Pie Man too. Right. But what I'm saying is that my specialty, like I was the one in the early 60s, even before I went to prison, I was the one that discovered that George Washington grew hemp, which is marijuana.
You brought that to light.
I discovered it.
Good for your research.
Okay.
Sir.
I mean, I understand. As a historian, I was reading George Washington's diary.
Okay.
And since he ran a plantation, what it really was like, it was a farmer's almanac. You know,
right.
Sowed wheat in the north field, sowed corn here, sowed some...
Put pot in the back.
Pot in the backyard, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I have no proof, and I doubt it, if any of the founding fathers smoked pot.
No, we weren't into that.
Yeah.
What about
however,
natives?
Madison, James Madison, okay.
You wrote a major book with him.
Well, Madison had a conversation with Ben Franklin when Ben Franklin was drinking laudanum, which is opium and alcohol, but that was for medical reasons.
It was also legal.
No, right.
A lot of drugs have been legal.
Right, but what I'm saying is that he wasn't, snorting, smoking opium to get high. He was very sick, and and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But Madison actually did say some very important things on intoxicants. Mm-hmm. The most important was a prohibitionist wrote him, and he said, "Look, it'll never work." Mm-hmm. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm saying it'll never work because if you ban one drug, people go to another drug, etc. Mm-hmm. The trick, he says, is to get them to use lighter intoxicants rather than stronger ones. Better beer and wine than whiskey.
Yeah, I understand.
You see what I'm saying? That was his goal. Yeah. So it sounds very much...
It's true.
Well, all right, but let me put it this way. Today, I would say on the basis of that he would be in the what they call the harm reduction school. In other words, marijuana isn't as bad, isn't as strong and dangerous as alcohol.
Well, yeah, okay. I put them in separate territories.
Well, let me put it this way.
It all has to do with neurotransmitter.
All right, but let me put it this way.
Yeah.
One of the biggest sources of accidental deaths, and particularly for youths, is drunk driving.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Horrible.
But every survey shows that people who only smoke pot are safer drivers, not only than people who drink alcohol, they're safer than the ordinary driver.
Now, that's really interesting.
Now, wait a minute.
And that's accepted?
Yeah, no, hold on a minute. Mm-hmm. The London Economist...
They may drive too slow.
The London Economist says explain that. Mm-hmm. The reason for that is they don't want to be arrested. Mm-hmm. So they're more cautious than the ordinary driver.
Yeah, it's also a state of consciousness.
All right, but you see what I'm saying? Is in other words, they're more cautious than the ordinary driver, okay, who's not drunk.
Right,
okay? The only exception to that is that there's a certain type of guy who drinks and smokes pot. He's more likely to get into an accident than even a drunk driver.
Right.
Because he's a high head, if you know what I mean.
I did a program once, if I may, Lenny. I did a program once way back with Timothy Leary, who was a big, everybody knows, was a big psychedelic experimenter along with Alpert and all that kind of stuff and everything. And he said to me, he studied a lot, and he was an advocate of psychedelics and whatnot. But he said that across the board, cross-culturally, there are about 5% of the population who have what is roughly called like an addictive personality. That is that 95% of the people can use something. There are people who do heroin all their life just a little bit, and they just keep going, and they don't go overboard. But there's about 5% who simply are like plungers in gambling. They do it, and they go, and they have to. It's about 5%, and that's a medical problem. It should be dealt with that way. But that by and large, most of the citizens of the world could handle alterations of consciousness that would come through various drugs and so forth reasonably and maybe even to their advantage.
Well, let me put it this way. As I say, I didn't like heroin because, as I say, it was sort of like being drunk. You know, that kind of. Every so often you see a heroin head on the street sort of nodding
They
off.
nod out. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So I didn't like that. You know.
Right.
Okay.
No, it's ugly.
But I never had a psychologically unpleasant experience with acid, okay, or cocaine or any of that stuff. I mean, as I say, the people that were coming over to Carmine's place were artists and writers and stuff like that. And you know, in those days, like he used to renovate old industrial lofts and turn them into artist studios and stuff like that. So artists were walking in and out.
Let me do an addendum to the Leary. Because Leary said that because he was a leading advocate in the time of this, Summer of Love and all that, of Woodstock, all that, of the psychedelic. But he said he thought that the drugs and the alterations in terms of consciousness that was the result of the introduction of drugs like acid and that kind of stuff that was there, pot and that, was just a tiny little thin layer of frosting on top of the cake in terms of understanding alterations in consciousness, to technology itself that is having feedback mechanisms upon human consciousness, which is far more important for us to understand than the effects that the drugs have.
Let me deal with that in two ways.
Okay.
It's two. What
but
you're really saying is two things.
He said that's true.
I met Tim Leary. I went to Tim Leary when he was still up in Boston.
Boston,
okay?
Way back.
Yeah, I'm
early,
saying.
Yeah.
In other words, in the early 60s. He had just become famous.
He was at Harvard.
Okay. Yeah. I went to him, and I've written it up because, as I said in the article, I don't remember the date of when I met Charlie Mingus.
Mingus
was
great.
I met him.
Loved him.
I was coming out of Tim Leary's toilet, and Charlie was coming in.
Okay. Right.
All right. And then we sat down and we smoked some pot, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Mingus, in the middle of this, we're smoking this mafia best pot.
It's
and
getting better all the time.
He turns to Tim. He turns to Tim and says, "You know, Tim, you think you've gotten the philosopher's stone with this acid," he says, "but me, Monk and Miles, we buy our acid by the jar." And he goes like this, you know.
Yeah. I had a friend who...
All right, so wait a minute. And he says, well, the only problem is, Tim, that I'm up here, meaning up in Boston, because down south I'm still a nigger.
Ah, yeah, right,
In other words, he really... He put him right on the spot.
Right.
You know, all this junk, all this acid and stuff and pot and everything else, great, except it doesn't solve anything in the real world.
Right.
That's what he was really saying.
Yeah.
And Tim had nothing to say. He just looked dumb, man. All right?
Yeah.
So I've written this up, and I said I had the remarkable experience of meeting one of the smartest men on the planet and one of the stupidest men on the planet at the same time.
Yeah, it was quite a meeting.
Oh, it was quite
meeting of remarkable men.
Hey, it really was.
Right,
you know,
remarkable.
Because understand, I had no idea that Mingus was there.
Ah, right.
All right, you know, so you know, it was a twofer. You know, okay. But the what you just said though about the mechanics of drugs, okay, the most important document that I've ever read on what goes on in your head with drugs is a thing called The Problem of Pharmacothemia by Sandor Rado.
Okay, I don't know.
All right.
That.
Well, what that was is Rado was a Budapest, psychiatrist who went to Vienna to study directly under Freud. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when Freud became super famous, people came to him from all over the world with all kinds of psychological problems, and he realized, I'm flooded by too many guys with too many types of problems. I can't focus on any one problem. So he would assign specific people with a specific problem to a specific psychiatrist. Sandor, you're my drug man.
Oh,
if somebody comes to me with a drug problem,
was he doing cocaine then?
Well, Freud was doing cocaine, but well, I don't know when he stopped, you know. But what I'm getting at is that he handed over all of his drug people to Sandor Rado. Now, Rado eventually ended up as a professor here at Columbia.
R-A-D-O?
R-A-D-O.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Eventually, he wound up as a professor here at Columbia. Psychiatric professor. Okay. And his article is really, I consider it a central document on drugs. In other words, what I really want people to do is let's all focus on that document and correct it, improve it, criticize it, but at least let's all be on the same page.
Do you have it on your site? Can you send it to me?
Yes, I can.
On a file? Will you do that?
Yes, I will. I'll be
first thing you
in
get
fact,
home tonight?
I'll do it.
Do it from here by
I'll
the
do
remote.
it. I'll do it for anybody that wants it. On the show, on the show, we're listed Brenner L21 at AOL.com.
Brenner, B-R-E-N-N-E-R 21.
Brenner, BRENNER L21 at AOL.com.
Okay, good.
All right.
And they can get in touch with
They
you.
can get in touch and I'll send it to them. All right.
Okay, yeah.
Now, basically what he says is, look, drugs are an interesting kind of physical phenomenon.
Yeah, we want to get to some of the politics of it now.
But wait a minute. But let me deal with this.
Okay, yeah.
He says, look, drugs are an interesting phenomenon because most things that happen to you, you can duck.
Yeah.
You know, you can get away from them, et cetera, or try to get away from them.
Right.
The difference with drugs is that once the drug is in you, you can't get away from it. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, but he says, here's the key thing. It isn't the drug that affects you. What happens is, when we're sitting here right now, we have a certain amount of our psychic energy that is pressing us down and keeping us stable. In other words, repressing all kinds of instincts. Like if we get into an argument, I don't whack you in the mouth.
Oh yeah, we have to have pattern recognition.
All right, you see, okay. What happens is the drug hits the mind, hits the brain, all right, and some of this repressive energy that is keeping your instincts down gets diverted to dealing with the drug. Okay? And then what happens is your instincts pop through the hole that was created by the diversion of your repressive energy to deal with the drug.
Interesting, yeah.
All right. In other words, he's giving it as a mechanical thing to, you know, sort of understand what's happening, okay? Now, each drug has a particular effect on you.
Yeah, and we haven't known that in the last 35 years.
We
didn't even know neurotransmitters
All right,
existed.
but what I'm saying is that each drug has a particular effect on you. Now, what happens is the high, the whoopee, you know, of a drug, or alcohol for that matter, you know, people get enthusiastic with alcohol too and so on and so forth. That's your elementary gut basic narcissism coming up through breaking through the repression. You know, the child who's so happy he's partying all the time, you know, okay? Now, that's the whoopee, okay? The problem, and this is where people get addicted and all that kind of stuff, is that if you take it and, woo, hey, that was great, and then you go back and take more, woo, that was great, eventually other instincts that aren't quite as whoopee break through the hole, come through the hole that was created, all right? And so that you get all kinds of sadism and masochism and blah, blah, you know, all the different stuff that's in us all can pop through. So the addict is the guy who's taken more to get to the whoopee, okay?
Yeah,
so he has to keep taking
about 5%.
All right, but you understand what I'm getting at. See, the guy who turned me on to both marijuana and to heroin. No, this was another guy, Jimmy Herman. The way he explained it to me with heroin, he says, look, the way you take it, because he was using it all the time, regularly, okay? The way you take it is you very carefully take it just like once a week, etc., so that you don't go over the border into addiction. And if you find yourself even one time over the border, for 1 minute, you stop and you wait a couple, 3 days before you take it again. And the name of the game is, like you say, is to take it in moderation. Right. Now, he took it for maybe 40 years without any problem. All right?
So, and most of the population can do that.
Yeah.
But listen, one of the problems is it's so interesting to go on forever, because I'm really interested in that with the neurotransmitters. We're learning how the brain is wired, how it's set up, and they got and what you get is a biochemical model for various states of consciousness and everything. But we want to talk about some of the fact in the modern world of that we have there seems to be a great appetite for drugs or altering of consciousness drugs and so forth that have great market value, and it's all illegal and made illegal, and it's got consequences in terms of the political organization and the economic organization that are massive and should be understood. And let's get to some of that. Afghanistan, Mexico, and some of the drug cartels.
Let me put it to you this way. The United States is the biggest market in the world for illegal drugs.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, that's for starters. And the United States is only 5% of the population of the world. It has 25% of all the prisoners in the world.
Is that a fact?
Oh, that's a fact.
25% of all prisoners?
You got it.
Political and otherwise?
You got it.
Oh, you got over 2 million now?
Oh, unbelievable.
And they won't even let her read a book.
Well, let me put it this way.
Crazy.
Last year, 864,000 people were arrested for possession of marijuana alone.
Isn't that coming to an end now?
No.
You got medical marijuana in California.
No.
Yeah,
Our wonderful
Yeah.
Democratic Party president, I emphasize that,
Yeah.
our wonderful Democratic Party president says, hey, look, in a state that has passed a medical marijuana law,
Yeah.
we'll let people who are using it for medicine
Mm-hmm.
get it through a regular agency.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going to let anybody just walk in on some store and say, hey, I got a bad headache, give me some of that good pot of yours.
Uh-huh.
In other words, they are enforcing the marijuana laws. They made it very clear. Now understand something.
We had a war
know,
on drugs for just say no.
But now
and all
here
that
is
baloney.
now when we're talking about Afghanistan and Mexico,
Yeah.
etc.
Huge.
Yeah. But we have to start with right here because America is the biggest market.
That's the draw. Yeah.
And it has a president who, in his memoirs, openly says, yes, when I was young, got out of college, I was doing coke.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we have an ex-cokehead arresting people for coke and all these other drugs.
Right.
Okay. At the same time, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember it very well. When Governor Patterson took over here in New York, one of the very first things he did was had a press conference where he announced that he had a girlfriend back in the bad old days when he was
I remember
only,
that. That was
and,
recent.
Yeah. And he told where he met with her and all that kind of
It
stuff.
was about the time of Spitzer.
Yeah, right after Spitzer,
Yeah.
right. But I mean, he no sooner got in when he announced that he had a girlfriend while having a wife or something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, he also did cocaine. Now, I think what he was trying to do was figure, look, eventually people will find that stuff out one way or another, so I'll beat him to it.
Yeah, right. Expect so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, also, I have a statement from Mayor Bloomberg, who just got reelected mayor of New York.
Yeah, by a narrow margin.
In 2001, he was interviewed by New York Magazine. Did you ever smoke pot? He says, yes, and I enjoyed it.
Okay.
So we have.
we got a coke.
All right, we're living in New York, where we have at least an ex-pothead mayor, an ex-cokehead governor, and an ex-cokehead president. All right.
Yeah.
And those are the guys who are arresting other people for doing what they did. Okay.
Right.
Now I say we got a choice, and other people have commented on this too. What's a young kid supposed to think if he realizes that the president of the United States did coke? Yeah,
right.
All right. So I say we do one of two things.
Do coke, you can become president.
Next time you get caught, kid, you tell them.
I just
you
did
tell
what
them
my president
because
did.
I'm hoping to run for president of the United
Right.
States, and nowadays you gotta smoke. In fact, look, let's put it this way: Dominic Carter, who
has Obama said to pot also, to any of the psychedelic stuff?
Oh, I mean, let me put it this way: it's impossible to believe that he went to cocaine before without smoking marijuana.
No, I'm just curious. For the record.
Yeah.
So
but what I'm getting at is that all I know from Bloomberg is pot. I don't know anything about Bloomberg
and cocaine. Maybe they don't want you to have any of that pot and coke because it's going to make you so advantaged your innate capability that you're going to become a threat to the people who are running things and become president of the United States. It's because it makes you more efficient rather than that it tells you.
Here's the thing. I'm arguing that we really got two choices. Either the government of the United States says, look, taking cocaine doesn't mean anything. It depends on who you are and your psychology, like you were saying.
To class, is it?
Or we reverse it and we put out a new anti-drug thing. All right, little kid out there, you think that Obama and Patterson, it's okay for you to snort cocaine because they snorted cocaine. But look what happened to them. It destroyed every one of their brain cells, and none of them grew back.
And they end up to be a president.
And they ended up to be. But look at that.
No, but you understand, it could be. They have a thing, it's like in sports. You could say that. Now, or back to Leary saying it's the technology that's really changing things amazingly, and we don't catch up with that because we've got outdated economic principles, and we're outdated, we're out of touch with what the future requires on a large scale, and we're not ready for a liberated world.
Well, look.
But anyway, let me make the point, is that in the area of sports, you can become a better sportsman if you do drugs. If you use drugs in order to enhance your ability to run or whatever it is, you have a better performance.
Well, you got to understand. Wait. You're talking about.
Let
drugs.
me make the point, Lenny. And the reason they do it is that's the principle that they won't allow in the society, that you can improve yourself through medicine or through drugs, and they can't allow that
hold on a minute.
for some ethical reason.
Hold on a minute. When they talk about drug use in sports, they're talking about two kinds of drugs. They're talking about drugs that stimulate you physically.
Steroids and stuff. Yeah.
At which, if they want to regulate it one way or the other, I'm not going to argue.
Okay.
And the other is things like pot, and other drugs. Now, I agree with you. Look, there are drug users who are excellent athletes, and there are people who, once they start taking drugs, they slow down. They stop being super athletes, et cetera. So it really is you and drugs, not drugs and you.
What are they trying to protect by keeping away from the idea that you can enhance your natural genetic given?
Look,
is it the work ethic and the labor theory of value?
I mentioned at the beginning of the show that when I was a kid, I used to go to the Bowery to my family's factory, and there were 50,000 drugs. Okay, look, prohibition for alcohol was a worldwide phenomenon. They tried it here, and they tried it under Lenin in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they realized early on it just isn't going to work.
They got a real problem. They got a real problem with the
But what I'm trying to get at is that what pushed people originally towards prohibition was the effect of alcohol on millions of people all over the world.
It's probably the worst.
Wait a minute.
Probably the worst drug out there is alcohol.
And the effect of opium when the British were selling it to the Chinese.
Remember the Opium Wars.
So that came up. Now, with regards to marijuana, the marijuana menace was an invention of the Roosevelt administration.
Roosevelt?
Yeah, Henry Anslinger.
Who was that guy who did it?
Anslinger.
Anslinger.
All right, but he was Roosevelt's man, all right? Now, what simply happened is he whipped up all the stuff about the gringo, the Chicanos, who were bringing all this marijuana, terrible stuff into the United States.
They're still coming it up and making a lot of money
wait. But what I'm trying to say is that at that particular time, like we know now for sure, okay, that among the most best-known marijuana users, wasn't known in his day, but we know it now for certain, of the 30s, when marijuana was...
Who?
Louis Armstrong.
No kidding.
Well,
those jazz musicians, they knew what was what.
Louis Armstrong smoked pot every day of his life from the 20s till he died. Every day of his life he had pot, and are you ready for this? Matzahs.
What's a matzah? Matzah is a matcha ball.
No, a matzah, the dry cracker that the Jews have.
Oh, matzah, they're dry. I was thinking matzah balls.
Yeah, matzah balls are
right.
Oh, right. But, I mean, every day of his life he had marijuana and matzahs.
Well, you can't go wrong on that.
Hey. But understand,
no, but that scores the point. That it increases creativity. And the point I'm trying to make is they do not want creativity. Now, listen, they don't want creativity. They want to, behavioral psychology, get compliant workers who will be wage slaves and fit into the system the way it is. They don't want a society where people are creatively free.
No, look, I'll tell you what.
That's what the premise.
I'll tell you what all the politicians
and
in America,
enhanced in that.
all the modern politicians, okay, talk up morality.
Yeah,
at the same time that they're robbing and killing and so on and so forth.
Be right there behind patriotism.
All right, but what I'm saying is that, George Bush had to tell about, I used to drink whiskey all the time, and then I gave it up. Now let's go bomb Iraq. That kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And they can kill millions in a war,
But here's the key. In terms of America, right now, we know 44% of the American people believe at least 44% believe in legalization. Now, it's actually a little more. Let me correct it. 44% of the American people have smoked marijuana, adults have smoked marijuana, and about 52% now think it should be legal.
Yeah, and that's going up. That's going up.
And it's going up.
Yeah.
Now, but here's the point. The Gallup poll broke down that 52%, and most of the people who favor legal marijuana, for recreation, we're not talking about medical marijuana, okay, are Democrats.
Okay.
It's about, 2/3 of the Democrats favor it, and only about 1/3 of the Republicans. That kind of, it was an intelligent thing on the part of Gallup to break it down.
Okay, good.
To figure it out. So what you got in the United States is a Democratic Party administration where the President of the United States is to do drugs.
You do drugs.
Okay. And
the governor of New York.
he isn't for real liberalization. Okay, a little reform here and there.
Nobody's for liberation.
Wait a minute, I'm trying to say, and see, it's a sword that cuts with both edges with regards to the Democrats. The average Democrat is so dumb and unpolitical that he doesn't go, "Hey, you, Obama, don't you know a majority of your party is for legalization of marijuana? You better get your act together and get going towards legalization." In other words, basically, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the undemocratic party, if you
Yes,
follow
but
me.
that goes without saying, Lenny, if I may. We have a system. We shouldn't say we have a democracy or we have an encouraging of it. We have a plutocracy. We are like serfs on a feudal estate, and we have an economic system. It's out of date with what the future requires. The future requires and will encourage creativity rather than objective opposition. A reaction to an authoritarian structure which characterizes all of our institutions.
What you're saying is
so
very good.
they don't want creativity.
Now, wait a minute.
They don't want thinking. They don't want enhancement. They don't want creativity. They want compliant people who will do what they're told.
But understand something. I agree with most of what you
so
said.
That's the reason
Wait,
behind
no,
it.
no.
Or the rationale.
No, the hardcore reason is very simple. The Democratic Party leadership, Obama and Rahm Emanuel, for example, his private secretary, as it were. Okay, their attitude is for us to get the bulk of what we want through Congress. The Democratic Party has to be a left-wing and a right-wing party at the same time. In other words, it has to keep having people for legalization of these various drugs and people against it at the same time. And that applies to every issue. Now, the reason they can get away with it, see, understand something. You and I and the average voter, we think we understand the politicians, but the politicians work full-time trying to figure out understanding us.
Of course.
Okay?
Well,
all right. No, wait. No, let me finish my point.
Okay.
The key point is that give Obama credit for some brains.
Oh, yeah.
He looks...
Like Machiavelli had brains.
I'm saying he looks at everybody and asks the same question of everybody. If I don't give the beggar what he wants, what will he do to hurt me?
And mine, yeah.
Okay? Now, if you take somebody like, let's say, Ethan Nadelman of the Drug Policy Alliance and George Soros, who funds the Drug Policy Alliance, 30% of its money.
That's on one issue.
No, wait. Obama looks at them and says, if I don't give them legalized recreational marijuana, what are they going to do to hurt me? And the answer is, they ain't going to do nothing to hurt them. They're going to vote for the Democrats in 2010 as the lesser evil against the Republicans.
Okay.
So he doesn't have to give them all that they want. So what he's doing is things like this. There's a big complaint in the black community that the penalty for selling crack cocaine is higher than the penalty for
powder cocaine.
Okay.
Yeah, because
so they
it's a
announced
class
they're
thing,
going to change that. But, and there was an article, excellent article on this in Final Call, Farrakhan's paper. He is not calling for releasing the guys who got the black guys who got sentenced to extra long sentences.
Invoking ex post facto.
In other words, it's pretty much agreed, most sane people agree, that there shouldn't be a difference in the penalty for crack and powder. Okay?
Yeah, but
that's
the same,
true.
Yeah, but that's
if
classism.
That's true.
That's racism and classism.
Wait.
Still
See,
there.
that's the point.
Yeah, that's
if
the point.
If that's true, then the guys who were in there and getting extra time for selling crack cocaine should be released at the time when the guys who sell powder
Well, they would
cocaine.
invoke ex post facto, or history is a nightmare and all that.
No, but you see what I'm trying to get at.
It's too narrow a focus you've got.
Like, you notice the way he does it. He gives the drug reformers a little bit of what they want. From now on, we won't have extra penalties for crack. But he doesn't release the thousands and tens of thousands who are already in there on the extra.
Yeah, right. That's a metaphor for the larger context. Yeah.
Hey, if you got some kind of a cancer problem and you need medical marijuana, it's legal, but not for you over there.
We've gone 50 minutes in the program. We're talking about everything. We could talk for hours, but
all
listen,
right.
I want to
wait.
Well, you're going to keep filling it up. We could talk endlessly.
I'm only establishing that the United States is double reverse, triple whammy hypocrisy.
Okay, fine, no problem.
Now let's go.
Now let's talk. We got 10. We got
Mexico.
7. We got drug cartels, and those people, God bless them. Maybe we're going to learn something in terms of the system we have in place, the legitimate order that is called the international consensus and so forth, is not adequate to what the future requires in terms of liberating the human population that's going to serve everybody. They do not have a model that's able to be done. They're trying to call themselves legitimate on an international scale. We may have some opposition from a large context from 1/5 of the population around the idea of interest and so forth, from the Muslim community, possibly. They may have an objection to that which is called legitimate by the people that are running things here, with a system that is not adequate to what the future requires in terms of liberation. Let me make the point. You've talked 50 minutes. All right, make the point. So they may have that, and they are supplying and making huge amounts of money through opium and so forth in Afghanistan. We have other people doing drug cartels, running drugs up from Mexico into this country, this great market and so forth. And it's a huge factor in terms of the international order. Maybe those people are our allies, those who want to see some sort of pressure put upon this system where they will not consider anything that's going to be liberating, which the future requires on a large context of thinking about the evolution of universal consciousness and weapon systems that are species lethal, and we need an alteration. We've got to have something that's going to shake it up and make real alteration.
All right, look, let's start with Afghanistan. The New York Times says on page 1 again and again and again that President Karzai's brother is a dope dealer.
Okay, he's making money.
And that Karzai is as crooked as a dog's hind leg.
Yeah, they're crooked and they're...
So hold on a minute. So what we got is the government of the United States right now is talking about sending more troops to back up.
He's considering it at the moment.
The brother of a dope dealer.
Right.
At the very least, the brother of a dope dealer,
right,
if not a dope dealer himself.
And it's being financed by
all right.
In huge amounts of money.
Now, wait a minute. At the same time, the United States just signed a treaty with Colombia, which is where the cocaine comes from. Yeah. The United States is setting up 7 new bases in Colombia.
Are they really?
Oh, for real. For real.
Okay.
Now understand, this is only to crush the drug dealers, okay? Except for two little problems, okay? Half the world is looking and saying, are you there to crush the dope dealers or are you there to crush the labor unions?
Both.
Okay? Because the chances of a labor union leader being killed are greater in Colombia than in any country in the world.
Okay, really? That's
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's, in other words, the State Department declares that.
Okay.
And when you go now to Mexico, another reason why they got the bases there in the real world, never mind what they say, is the government of the United States does not want Chavez around in Venezuela.
Yeah, he's a pain
all right,
in the
so they're
and
putting
Morales,
bases in
yeah.
Colombia.
Right,
All right, next door.
And they got that thing going in Ecuador.
Yeah,
now.
now, wait. I mean, in other words, in both Afghanistan and in Colombia, we're dealing with ultra-right governments notorious for their corruption. Right now, as I'm talking now, a couple of days ago, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times reported a scandal has broken out in Colombia. Karzai was illegally spying on political opponents.
You were talking in Afghanistan, not
No,
Colombia.
I'm talking about Colombia.
Yeah, in Colombia,
Karzai. Yeah, no, I'm talking about Uribe.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, you had Karzai.
In other words, we're getting two characteristics: two corrupt governments and two right-wing governments.
The whole system is corrupt.
All right, no,
the
wait
whole
wait,
system is corrupt and inadequate to what's needed. That's the issue.
Hold on. I'm not disagreeing with you, but hold on. We don't have to go.
Big point.
Okay. Now, in Mexico, it's even worse. Okay. What you had up until about 1980 or 90 was the government was run by the PRI, the Party of Revolutionary Institutions. All right. Now, it was notorious for its corruption. Okay. But it was a stable corruption. In other words, if you were a dope dealer, you went to the government and you paid off a certain amount of money.
That's what we have now, stable corruption
around
the world.
Now, wait.
Internationally.
No, wait. But what happened was that eventually the PRI actually lost an election.
Okay, yeah.
And then, all of a sudden, there became it was a question of whether the new government, the PAN government, whether if you were a dope dealer, you dealt with the federal government or you dealt with the old PRI government in your state. Okay? So what has happened, and I got this out of Foreign Affairs magazine. No, I mean, in other words, these are guys who are looking at a cold and hard.
Right, of course.
Was that there was a shift in the power relationship between a dope dealing that was controlled and regulated by the government to a thing where the government is controlled and regulated by the dope dealers.
Right, okay.
Okay, in other words, what began to happen was every dope dealer would go to every politician and you would line up, well, I'll get the chief of police, but meanwhile my enemy is getting the army who's going to sick and is going to sick the army on me and the chief of police. So you've had now, in the last 3 years, from 2006 to now, 2009, according to Atlantic Magazine, latest issue, 14,000 people have been killed in Mexico.
That much?
That much.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Wow, that's getting
Juarez is the most murderous city on the planet Earth. Okay? They actually sent, about 2 years ago, they had to send 7,000 soldiers into Juarez, because what simply happens is that the dope dealers, they fight each other, they fight the government, they fight with, sometimes it's the government and them against a rival gang. I mean, it's every variety of corruption, okay?
And it's a corruption against what would be the right way of dealing with this question if that system in the United States was on a right course in terms of understanding the human condition.
Everybody understands.
It's our problem.
Everybody understands, including Hillary Clinton as a Secretary of State, that all of this is, they are fighting over the American market.